Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the full council meeting of Spennymoor Town Council, 22nd of December. And can I first of all wish everyone a very happy Christmas and all the best for 2021. Can I remind everyone that the council would like to advise you that this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube and will subsequently appear on the council website. Could I ask that all mobile devices are switched off or are on silent? Thank you. The first item on the agenda is a very sad one for me, and that is to say that it is my sad duty to announce the death of ex-councillor Jeff O'Hare on Saturday, 19th of December. Jeff has been poorly for some time and retired from the council, and we offer our sincere condolences to his wife Liz and family at this sad time. For many years, Jeff was internal auditor for the town council. He then became a town councillor himself, and latterly in 2014-15 was mayor of Spennymoor. He will be missed not only as a colleague, but as a friend to many. I would like to ask members to pay respects with a minute's silence, and I will give opportunity for any other member that would like to speak with regard to Jeff. Thank you. Thank you for the minute silence, and I'll now give opportunity for Councillor Neil Foster to speak.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your kind words and tribute to Jeff and his family. Can I, on behalf of the Labour group, both past and present, take this opportunity to pay our tribute to Jeff. Jeff was a long-standing member of the Labour group, and it is important to recognise the hard work that he did. He was a quiet man who went on in his way very quietly, but he was a determined man, and he was a good one at getting his point over when he needed to. He was a great personal support to me and a great source of advice. But not only did he serve his community in terms of his time with the town council, he was a big supporter of the football club. He certainly did a lot of work for some of the local charities, and I must say he's a big help to me as the treasurer to the community association. I know that everybody both on the council and in the town would like to pass on our condolences to the family, and he will be a big miss. As I said, a quiet man, a determined man, but a man I think we're all going to appreciate more, unfortunately, now that he's left us.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. I have no other requests to speak, so I'll move now on to the formal part of the agenda. Before we start, I'd just like to have opportunity to give some housekeeping rules, and that is to say that I would like if all members could speak through the chair, and if they do wish to speak, if they can use the RTS function. If any member leaves the meeting, could I also ask if those members could use the RTS to inform me that you have left the meeting? Officers will also pick that up. That is important because of the voting system. Thank you. For members' information, I am making some changes to the meeting this evening, and that is to say that item 6, which is the presentation from Mr. Steve White, Acting Police Crime and Victims Commissioner, I would like to put on the agenda immediately after members' dispensations. That would allow the Police Commissioner and his colleagues to leave the meeting at some point if they would like to, or they are quite welcome to stay whilst we discuss the open part of the agenda. The other alteration that I would like to change is item 21, which is update. And I would like to move item 21 to just after item 18, which is exclusion of press and public. Thank you. And if we can now go through the agenda, and if I can ask for apologies.
We have apologies from Councillor Harvey, Councillor Grayson and Councillor Geldard.
Declarations of interest.
None received.
Chair. Sorry, Chair. Apologies. I've just arrived late at the meeting. I'd like to declare an interest in agenda items 19 and 20.
Thank you, Councillor Malloy. I am hearing from Councillor Elizabeth Wood that she's currently leaving the meeting. We'll try to log back in as she has no sound. Members' dispensations.
None given.
And if I can now welcome Mr. Steve White, Acting Police and Crime and Victims Commissioner, to the meeting, together with Joe Farrell, Chief Constable, Gary Ridley, Assistant Chief Officer, Sharon Cadell, Interim Chief Executive and Monitoring Officer, Lucy Constantine, Senior Media Officer, and our own Michael Samut, Neighbourhood Inspector.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening. Just making sure that you can all hear me. If you nod your heads and then right, it's all working. Excellent. Very good to see you all this evening, and thank you for allowing us to have a slot on your meeting tonight, particularly given that it's so close to Christmas. So yes, I've got the Chief Constable and Gary Ridley, Assistant Chief Officer. He's also my Chief Finance Officer here as well, and my Chief Executive, Sharon Cadell. I wanted to start by giving you a little bit of context to the decision that I made earlier this year in relation to the centralised custody facility, and then the Chief will take us through the first part of a presentation, followed by Gary, and then if there's time, Chair and people wish, we've got time for questions towards the end. Hopefully we'll address most of the more commonly asked questions, and I'm sure that some of the councillors will have seen the leaflet drops that have been sent out recently as well. So, centralised custody facility. Custody is a function of policing. It's the operational responsibility of the Chief Constable in terms of how that function of policing is carried out. And I think it's worth just spending a moment to consider the differences in responsibilities between the Police and Crime Commissioner and Chief Constable. There is a separation certainly around operational independence, and that's important to note. But of course, in any kind of significant spend of this kind, then clearly my responsibility as the Acting Police Crime and Victims Commissioner is important when it comes to scrutinising the Chief Constable's plans and holding the Chief to account, and also in terms of signing off spend of public money and ensuring that it's the best value for the taxpayer. But also my responsibility is around the totality of policing provision across County Durham and Darlington, and the driver there is essentially the raison d'etre for a police and crime commissioner, which is the provision of an efficient and effective police service for the area. So there's those two different and distinct responsibilities. And as I said, custody is very much an operational matter for the Chief Constable. So going back a number of years, the force started to review the custody centres that it has, and indeed looked at a number of options in terms of renovation. And as Gary will describe, the mixture of estate that we have around the force is quite broad, to put it mildly, and that's certainly the case around custody. But things rather came to a head last year following an unannounced inspection by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Service in relation to Durham's custody facilities. And it didn't raise anything that the force wasn't already aware of, but it did really formalise the need for there to be some significant work to make sure that the custody standards within the force meet modern day requirements. I've been in policing for 32 years now, and certainly the custody environment now doesn't bear any resemblance to the custody environment when I was a young officer 32 years ago. Things move on and the estate has to move with it. And as you might expect, when we're considering cells and custody complexes and changes in legislation and regulations, that generally doesn't come particularly cheap either. So the force started to look at various options in terms of dealing with the issues that were raised with HMIC and dealing with the overarching issue, which is about making sure that the custody facilities in Durham meet modern day standards for reasons that both the Chief and Gary will detail shortly. At the start of this year, the force presented a concept to me and my office, and we started our process of scrutiny in relation to that. And one of the things that I was very keen to ensure was that the custody issue and project was not going to be standalone, given some of the significant issues across the force estate. And so I asked the force to revise its estate strategy, which they did. And that is going to essentially, an action plan is coming out of that estate strategy, which is going to review the estate across the force. And again, Gary will speak about some of that detail shortly. That was part of the scrutiny process, because when one is considering a significant spend of public money, we need to make sure that it is fit for purpose. We need to make sure that, for example, as indeed I have experienced, that when a new police build is finished, within a few months, you don't end up with porta cabins in the car park because you didn't think of some other aspect of estate, etc. So I wanted to make sure that we were looking, that the force was looking at it as a whole, and that the case was therefore compelling. And I have to say that the case presented by the force was compelling in terms of the concept, and at the end of July, to cut a long story short, I approved the next stage of the project, which was to approve the force submitting a planning application and also to acquire the land, which you'll be aware is off of the Durham Gate estate. A couple of things also then to add before we move to the presentation. I am acutely aware that in my temporary role as acting Police and Crime Commissioner, I needed to consider whether or not I needed to make a decision in relation to the custody project. And given that HMIC FRS had raised some fairly significant issues in relation to the standard of existing custody estate, this was not something, in my view, that could be put on hold. Policing and standards and the regulatory process continues. And whilst there was certainly not an expectation that I would be required to carry out this acting role for as long as I have, for various reasons, I did feel that there was an urgency and a very clear need to progress the project. In addition to that, there was a significant argument around a potential loss of the site. The site, in terms of meeting the requirements of the force, these kind of sites do not come along particularly frequently. And again, as Gary will talk about, in terms of the requirements and the regulations and the complex nature of the custody environment, and indeed where it was going to be located, we needed to strike whilst the iron's hot. And in terms of the acquisition of the land, it's a commercial transaction. And if there was a significant delay, we may have lost that land. And then finally, but by no means least, any delay to the project would mean increased costs for the taxpayer of County Durham and Darlington due to inflation, and any kind of stalls would inevitably lead to additional costs. And when you're looking at a budget of £21 million, then you need to absolutely make sure that costs are controlled as tightly as possible, and that the force achieves its operational aims with best value for the taxpayer. So for those reasons, I felt as though it was entirely appropriate for me to make the decision. But of course, this is a long-term project, and certainly post-elections next year, when there will be a newly elected Police and Crime Commissioner in post, they will take on the mantle of the scrutiny around this project going forward. So that's a little bit of context in terms of where we currently are. So from the end of July, and indeed up until and including this evening, and it will go into the new year, we've embarked on a significant programme of engagement. We've done, I've lost count of the number of briefings such as this that we've conducted across various groups around Durham and Darlington to explain the rationale, to explain the concept, and to let people know exactly what the plans are and how they're going to benefit the constabulary and therefore the service of policing to the communities that we serve. So Gary, I think, or Sharon, I'm not quite sure who, has the presentation ready to share, and we'll go to Joe Farrell and the Chief Constable.
Thank you, Chair.
Can I just come in before that? I've been disabled from sharing my screen, unfortunately. Could I be enabled to share screen so I can show the presentation, please?
I'm being advised, yes, that's possible.
Can you all see that now?
Yes, Sharon, we can.
I can see it on my screen.
We just go on to the main slide, Sharon.
Joe, shall I do these ones?
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you all. My name's Gary Ridley. I'm the civilian member on the management team for the force, and as Steve said, also his chief finance officer. When we take a step back from the wider estate, rather than just looking at custody initially, what we find is a bit of a mixed bag. We have 12 main stations, 4 of which include the main 4 custody sites as indicated on the screen. We also have a small fallback custody facility at Spennymoor. That's our most recently built custody facility. They do vary in age quite a bit. In addition to our 12 main stations and our 12 main populated towns and cities, we also have 15 neighbourhood bases, our section offices, and we also have 10 other specialist assets, of which I've mentioned 3 or 4 there. These are not operational police stations. Moreover, they do provide, however, a really important part of the overall service that we provide to the public. So when we think about our estate, it's not just all about police stations per se. Next slide, please, Sharon. So we've all heard of the term austerity. So what's been happening with the estate? And this slide just gives an indication of what we've been doing. 6 years ago, we opened the new police headquarters by moving out of the old one, which was 200 yards away on the Akeley Head site. I think I recall that saved us about £700,000 a year in running costs from moving to a smaller, more open plan-based office. We bought the ex-Royal Mail warehouse at Peterlee, and that houses a number of our specialist crime officer and staff assets within it. It's also our main hub for all of our forensic staff as well. Meadowfield is our very large training centre. Meadowfield's about 3 miles west of the centre of Durham. Again, located on an industrial estate, ex-Royal Mail building, I seem to recall. When we've been going through the process of fitting new classrooms and building some specialist pieces of equipment within there. That's now used not just by us, but by a number of other police forces. Our SARC is our Sexual Assault Referral Centre. This deals with vulnerable victims of crime, and we've just moved into the former court building at Chester Street. The court building, which houses our new SARC, is actually physically attached to the police station and at Chester Street, and as well as it being an operational police station, one of our 12 main ones, it also houses Special Branch and our digital investigation unit. These are the teams who deal with electronic devices that we recover from either scenes or individuals or get given to us. In relation to custody itself, I think we've spent probably about £1 million or so in the last 10 years just trying to make our assets compliant with all the various rules and regulations, which I think the Chief Constable will touch upon soon. Neighbourhood bases, we try to upgrade or refurbish a section office each year. The latest one was Sherburn section office, just outside to the west of the city centre. £300,000 refurbishment. I think that's now an excellent facility to support the local community. Heating upgrades, boring stuff, in the same way that you might replace your heating system at home. We do the same with police stations, and you're looking at probably £200,000 or so to put a new heating system into a main police station, and that will probably extend its life by a good 10 years or so. We've done a number of those in recent years. So, you know, we do invest in the bits of the buildings which the public and, quite frankly, quite often police officers never ever see, but which does help to maintain the local presence. My final point on this slide is that in reality, however, as well as having the estate, just like any other large public sector body, we cannot run a police force without ICT, which is becoming ever more complex, ever more driven by security considerations, and ever more expensive. And we also can't run a police force without police cars and police vehicles, of which we have about 420, I think, at present. And finally, COVID's been a big learning point for us. Out of about 1,000 members of police staff and 1,200 officers, we have about 400 to 500 officers and staff working from home any one day of the week. And this is something that we want to continue going forward post-pandemic, and that will clearly give us an opportunity just to think about what our estate looks like. Next slide, please, Sharon. So issues to address. Bit of a mixed bag. We've got some very good assets. We've got some ones which are average, and we've got some ones which are in quite poor state, if I'm honest. The running costs vary quite considerably, as indicated. For every square metre of space that the acting PCVC owns, you're looking at about £89–90 to run. That's made up of rates, utility costs, cleaning costs, and repairs. Out of 43 police forces in the country, we are below average. We're in the third lowest quartile. We've never been a big spender on buildings within Durham's history. We prefer instead to invest in ICT and fleet, and more importantly, police officers and police staff. The assets that we own are a mixture of freehold and leasehold. I think we have about 3 or 4 leasehold assets, i.e. we don't own the land upon which they sit. What that means in practice is that if we do want to improve these assets, it can be more expensive than just owning the assets lock, stock and barrel, and it just tend to take more time. Finally, market values are quite low, even though we're talking quite often about quite large assets. The values aren't great. Why is that? Well, in reality, if you think of a police station, there are not a lot of alternative uses other than being a police station. What that means is if we do dispose of an asset, any developer will come along and probably net off the cost of demolition against any value that they offer us, which tends to depress market values somewhat. Next slide, please, Sharon. Issues to address. We have a lot of backlog maintenance. All public sector organisations are the same in that regard. Collaboration is a really important point that we want to get across this evening. Barnard Castle and Newton Aycliffe, we are in there with the fire and rescue service. These are police stations that we moved out of, and we moved into the fire and rescue buildings. Literally, in the case of Newton Aycliffe, it was 30 yards away. I think that was about 7 years ago, 6–7 years ago. It works really well. These are modern, well-equipped, bright officers, slap bang in the middle of where they need to be, and the officers like working out of there. In relation to Darlington, I think we're in 3 assets, 3 buildings which are owned by Darlington Council, and equally we have some Darlington staff, Darlington Council staff who are working out of Darlington Police Station. So wherever we can, we're always looking to try to partner up, because my view, my personal view, my professional view is that it kind of makes sense. We share assets, we share risks, we share the running costs, and we're not uncommon in terms of that. Next issue, sorry, next slide, please, Sharon. At this point, I'll hand it over to the Chief Constable, who'll just take us through the next few slides. Thanks.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you, Chair. Before I get into some of the detail, ladies and gentlemen, just want to highlight to you that the function of custody is key to delivering policing. So key part of our role and responsibility is obviously the investigation of crime. And people who are suspected of committing crime are arrested and taken into custody. And the function of custody is in order that we can secure and preserve evidence against those people. Now that might be by way of interviewing them. It might be by way of seizing clothing, seizing property, either from them or searching properties that they have control over. It might be by way of forensic examination of parts of their body. But the whole function of custody is part of that investigative process that allows us to then present the best evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service and allow them to make a decision if we believe we have sufficient evidence to charge that individual so that they can go through the court process and victims of crime can receive justice. So it's important to say that before I get into the detail, what the purpose of this provision is, and it's a key part of policing, as you can imagine. Probably also worth saying that the people that we arrest in the main have some degree of vulnerability. There are very few people who get taken into custody who don't have a degree of vulnerability. That may be by way of alcohol, drugs, mental health issues. So that's again worth considering when I start to talk about this is a highly regulated area. As Steve said, it's not what it looked like 30 plus years ago when we joined the police. It's bound by lots of legislation, including the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, the Equality Act, the Human Rights Act, fire regulations, and over and above that, there is a whole raft of Home Office guidance, which includes the design, the best design of these facilities as we stand in the year 20 and into 21. And that is a design that's constantly changing and upgrading, hence why there's a substantial cost goes with this facility. So currently the issues, and I've just put a summary of them. First and foremost, safety of detainees. I obviously have a responsibility to ensure that everybody that is taken into custody is looked after and they are safe and secure. And with those vulnerability issues, some challenges. So there's lots of regulation around issues of safety. There are issues in relation to the design. We have currently, the suites range from 60 at the worst to probably 20 years old. Safety and privacy are an issue in all of the suites when compared against what the design currently and requirements are by the Home Office. There are environmental issues in terms of no natural light, ventilation, heating. And one of the key design features of a new suite is that there should be clear lines of sight for staff working within the suite so that they can see from what we call the charge desk, which is the sort of hub of the whole facility, down the different corridors where the cells are. Because we have an aged custody estate, many of our processes are inefficient. So we have a sort of, if you like, a one in, one out type arrangement. When the custody sergeant is dealing with one individual, nobody else can then come into that suite. So what we currently have is people who are arrested and detained are having to wait with officers in vehicles outside the custody facilities and wait until the staff are available for them to come into the suite. And as Gary says, we have modernised and invested money over the years in order to adapt the current facilities, but they cannot and don't meet the current Home Office guidance and regulations. And many of them, while we can mitigate some of the risk in terms of investing money or putting additional resources into the custody environment, what we can't do is eliminate the risk that we currently have in relation to the design of our aged estate. Can we go on to the next slide? So the proposal will bring about the opposite of all the limitations that I've just described. It'll be legal, safe, and compliant. We plan to, if you imagine, the new facility will all be on the ground floor, and then on the first floor we will centralise some of our crime investigators, some of our CID officers, some of our officers who investigate sexual offences and offences against children. We'll centralise what we call our prisoner handling teams. So these are investigators who deal with what we call volume crime. So some of the more routine investigations, that's not to say that they're not important, of course, to those victims, but some of the higher volume of our investigations. In centralising the facility, there will be some reduction in our current staffing costs and our IT costs and our medical costs. So the current provision is such that we have an arrangement where we have what we call forced medical examiners. So if somebody coming into custody needs to be examined in relation to issues of physical or psychological issues, then we wait for the forced medical officers because they are in the main GPs. And so our requests come as a secondary in terms of their priority. With a new centralised suite, we can afford to alter the contract and have full-time nurse provision within the suite. And when I talked earlier about inefficient processes, one of the many inefficient processes currently is waiting for our forced medical examiners, or if we consider the issue is something that we can't wait, and as the staff aren't medically qualified, sometimes we have to take those people to A&E to have them checked out in order that we can deal with the issues that they're complaining of. So a centralised suite gives us the opportunity to have dedicated nurse care. Court digitisation moving forward, we anticipate that the current arrangement where if somebody's charged with an offence and we recommend that they are remanded in custody, they go to prison while prior to trial, then that's arranged by way of other contractors coming and taking those people to the magistrates' court, and the remand hearing then takes place in the magistrates' court. People may be familiar with that. Moving forward, that remand hearing will be carried out from police custody cells remotely through digital arrangements to cut out that need to transport somebody, to hold them in the court and the magistrates, hold them in the cells at the magistrates court before deciding whether they're remanded or whether they are released. I've talked about more efficient handover processes. So a new facility, instead of having to wait for the custody sergeant to be available, the officer will bring the individual to the new suite, bring them in, and we have in a new suite what we call a holding area. So a cell in some respects, but made of a material that you can see through. The individual will be searched and they will be placed in that holding cell, and the officer who's arrested them will then be able to either continue with the investigation or return to their duties. So you haven't got this backing up outside the custody suites that we currently have on occasions. And in relation to, and some of the presentations that we've done, people have been concerned about travelling times. The increase in some cases in travelling times, and there are, I suppose, winners and losers in this, will be offset against the more efficient processes that we'll be able to introduce as a result of having a centralised suite, which will have 48 cells, and it will have a corridor of cells for women, for separate one for juveniles, and then 2 corridors for men who are detained. That is all in line with the current Home Office guidance and regulations, and talks to issues of dignity and security and appropriateness, particularly in relation to vulnerable people or for young people who are vulnerable. We'll maintain a strong neighbourhood footprint in local areas, and the provision and the current estate that we have in terms of the locations. So currently we have suites at Bishop Auckland and Peterlee and Darlington and Durham. Officers will still be working from those stations. They'll be deployed from their stations. So this doesn't have any effect in relation to that. Sharon, could you go on to the next slide? The purpose of this slide, and it's quite a lot of detail on, is just to give you a comparison in relation to the number of cells and the way that we have them distributed. So currently we have 53 over the 4 sites, which I've described to you. Moving to more central facilities and drawing together your locations for custody is not unusual, and we're seeing that some forces have already done it, some are sort of on the journey as we are, and it just gives you an example. So I'll just take the top one, which is South Wales. So 174 cells spread over only 4 custody facilities, obviously a much bigger policing area, much bigger population, but the point of the slide is to say to you, this move to a central and modern facility is not unusual in terms of when comparing ourselves against other forces. Previously, up till 4 years ago, I used to work in Northumbria Police up the road in Tyne and Wear. The custody facilities there have been centralised in relation to a big suite at North Shields and one in the centre of Newcastle. So I've got some experience and can see some of the many benefits of reducing your custody footprint and moving in line with the regulations to a centralised facility. Thank you, Chair. Sharon, can we go on to the next slide? I think Gary will pick up the last couple.
Yes, thank you. So next, in relation to custody, public consultation as part of the planning, the statutory planning process that is underpinned by a broader consultation, such as this meeting this evening. Once we're through the statutory planning process, which we're hoping will take about 3 months from now, there is a procurement process to identify a building contractor. That is a relatively quick process. If that goes to plan, we are looking to start construction on site round about late summer next year. We think it's about an 18-month contract build, and we would look to hopefully receive handover from the new facility from the contractor in the spring of 2023. So in the meantime, nothing's going to change. The existing sites are there and they're going to be used for custody. Also, what will happen post handover, there will be some smaller ancillary teams moving into the new site. People like our property staff, part of the new build will have a very large property stall. Quite often when people get arrested, we have to recover bits of property that we need for evidential purposes. So that's what we mean by the other related moves. Next slide, please, Sharon. And in terms of the broader estates piece, we have a proposed strategy. We'll be looking to have an action plan on the back of that, and what that does, in the same way that we run any other public sector body, any good organisation, what we try to do, we try to look at what our demand is now, what it will be in the future, and we try to accommodate all of that demand within the amount of money that we have available to spend, and also have an eye on the various types of technology, not just what we have available now, but what we think it will be in the future, because what we're finding is technology is rapidly changing what we have to deal with, and also how we do apply our trade as a police force. Acting PCVC Steve has taken 2 decisions, initially to invest in the new custody facility, and also on the back of that will be a land purchase as well. In relation to consultation and engagement, this is part of this process this evening, and what we mean by that is we've had lots of sessions now with elected representatives such as yourselves, community representatives. We are in regular contact with officials from the council. We've spoken to the NHS, the judiciary. We've spoken to some businesses. We've spoken to some of our key suppliers, and we've spoken to the NHS. So we're taking a very broad approach to engagement, and this isn't just going to finish anytime soon. I suspect this will be an ongoing piece of work, because clearly there will be questions over time that we're keen to engage colleagues and individuals on as well. Next slide, please, Sharon. the end. Thank you for your attention. With that, Chair, if it's okay with you, we'll hopefully be able to answer questions our colleagues have. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Steve, Joe and Gary, for your presentations. Could I request at this point that you provide our town clerk with a copy of the presentation so she can actually circulate it to all members? It would be appreciated.
Certainly recognise that.
Thank you. Prior to the meeting, our town clerk did send invitation out to all members asking if any members had questions. I do have questions that I've previously asked myself that I would like to put over tonight, but also I have Councillor Neil Foster, who also has questions to ask. There hasn't been any other questions specific to the custody suite. I will give members a small opportunity to ask questions, but would ask that those questions are specific to the custody suite and the presentation that's been made, and not with any other matter. I would also like to extend an invitation to Steve, Joe, or any other members of the team, if they would like to come back to Spennymoor Town Council. I'm sure we have lots of other questions that we'd like to put to you. So that is an invitation that I hope you will accept.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Certainly.
Thank you. In regard to the question that I've already sent in and had a response, I took the opportunity as part of the consultation for the AP to use the email address to contact you. And it is in relation to traffic management in built-up areas. And in close proximity to the proposed site, we do have the estates of York Hill and also Durham Gate. I believe that the custody suite will operate 24 hours a day, so there will be a lot of traffic generated from other locations in the area, and that some of the traffic that may be coming through may also be bringing in prisoners where there may be a safeguarding issue. And I was informed that on the rare occasions there may be times when you may have to close the road, or you may have to have a blue light flashing. So because we are so close to these sites, I would like to ask how you would manage the traffic management, and also would like to ask on the development itself, is there a direct link straight onto the 8167, or will it divert through the estates themselves, the industrial estate? I mean, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to ask Gary if he can come in relation to both those points, to be honest, because it's fairly heavily involved in the planning process. Gary? You're on mute, Gary.
Sorry. Yeah. Yes, thank you. In relation to traffic management as part of the planning process, we've had to submit a travel plan, and what this looks at is how busy the custody facility is going to be, and what we do as part of that, we identify peak busy times, and what we do know is that quite often some of our busiest times are into the evening in terms of arrests. So therefore, I think that within that we won't be causing too much congestion at all, I feel, in relation to rush hour driving. In relation to access to the site, it's via the industrial estates. If you know where the site is, you actually drive just right next to the Black & Decker site. However, for the purposes of emergencies, there is a small, the proposal contains a direct access onto the A167, but that's only for extreme emergencies, such as, say, potentially a fire might be an example. So it won't be the case that there will be direct access onto the motorway for obvious reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I bring Councillor Neil Foster in with his 2 questions?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, broadly, there's a question of, is this the right thing to do? I think you've answered why that needs to be done. And is this the right place to do it? That's obviously the subject of the conversation. My 2 questions, the proposed site on Durham Gate North is allocated as employment land. I don't believe this will bring any new jobs to the county and may well reduce the desirability of this location. How many, if any, new jobs will be created? My second question is, having transported the prisoners to the location, what responsibility do you have for returning people to their hometowns? In particular, when there are no bus services running and when people have no financial resources to get home. I know you've raised that in the report sheet that you gave us, but I do have a concern where in the past that has failed to be done properly.
Thank you, Neil. I was going to ask if Joe could take that last point first, if that's all right. Joe?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So people who are released from custody, we don't have an obligation to return them home, but it's worth me saying that when they come into custody, they're subject of an extensive risk assessment, because that allows us to determine the level of care and observation that they need to be under while in custody with us. And on release, they are also subject to a risk assessment. Where people are vulnerable or if they're juveniles, we do take them home. The other options are people are collected by friends, relatives, people get on public transport, people pay for taxis. I know that it's a concern in terms of people when they leave the facility. We always try and be as cooperative and helpful as we can, and give people good advice in terms of ways to get home. But we won't be giving everybody a lift home from the facility. We're not obliged to do that, and obviously that is resource intensive. I'm going to pick up the other.
Yeah, I was going to ask Gary around the employment issue. Gary?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, yes, Councillor Foster. In simple terms, I feel that when a council decides on its local plan, it allocates all land within the council area to some broad headings, be it residential, land, industrial, agricultural, or employment. This falls into the employment category for I think obvious reasons. It's clearly not residential housing and it's not an industrial building. In relation to jobs created, there won't be any more jobs created. What we are doing is looking to relocate the people, the staff officers and detention, the police officers and detention officers who operate out of the 4 existing custody sites into the centralised facility. That still falls, I feel, within the definition of employment, because this is around the maintenance of existing jobs as opposed to job creation.
If I can just come back on those 2 points. Certainly in terms of the employment, my concern is that area in the past has been discussed as a possible location for some retail facilities, whether that's fast food or there were possibly warehousing facilities there. And it's a question of whether those firms would consider locating on a site which has been used for this purpose. and whether there's some potential risk to the loss of other employment opportunities based on this exercise in that land. And certainly in terms of, do you have a responsibility to get people home? You're now transporting people further than they can expect a person to reasonably walk home. Though, as I said in the past, I am aware that you have turned people out at Newton Aycliffe police station in the early hours of the morning with no financial means, and then expected them to walk back to Spennymoor. Now, you may consider that perfectly reasonable. I may consider that perfectly reasonable. However, there is the opportunity that they may get into some problems in coming home and cause some additional problems. So what I'm trying to suggest is, if you're going to turn people out in the early hours of the morning, there is no bus service, there is no personal way of getting home, what are you expecting to do to get home? And is there a chance they commit other offences in an effort to seek their way home?
My experience, and if I look at where our custody facilities are now, there's no evidence to say that people who are released from custody at any time in the night, you put that as the scenario, commit crime in those areas. So we are releasing people, you know, as we speak, and it doesn't necessarily follow with the current arrangement. We constantly look at the relative busyness and occupancy of those locations. So it doesn't always follow now. Let's just go for an example that if you are arrested in Peterlee, you will be detained at Peterlee Custody Suite, because if it's full, or if there's a backlog, or if the prisoner has certain needs, it might be more appropriate to drive past Peterlee Custody Suite and go to Durham City. And, you know, I could use that scenario all over the force. So there are people being released from locations that they don't live by. But I come back to, we don't have a responsibility to return them all home, and neither should we use a very expensive and scarce resource to do so, unless that person is vulnerable. Can I just make the point about retail locations? My experience in Newcastle and in North Tyneside is that had no effect on further building and occupancy by retail establishments. At North Tyneside, there's a B&Q, there's a pub restaurant nearby, and the other facility in the centre of Newcastle clearly has pubs, bars, restaurants, hotels, and business premises all around it.
Thank you. I'll move on now. I've got 3 members that would like to ask questions. That is Councillor Pete Malloy, Councillor Rachel Richards, and Councillor Martin Hammer. I'll take them in that order, but I will draw this to a close. If there are any other members after these 3 members that have questions to ask, I would like you to put those through the town clerk, please, and she will then submit these to the authority. And then if you could then respond, if there are any questions, if you could respond back to the town clerk, and then she'll give us the appropriate information. Thank you. Now, I believe the order is, there was Councillor Dean Ranyard who made a request to speak first. He dropped out from my screen. So I'll bring Councillor Dean Ranyard in, followed by Councillor Pete Malloy, Rachel Richards, and Martin Hammer. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I may just ask, obviously a 48-cell custody facility is going to be a concern to the nearby residents of the site. There are residential areas not that far from the site in question. I'd just like to know what reassurance you can give to those residents living close by to the facility that they're going to be safe Obviously, as we've discussed, people can be discharged from custody at any particular time, and you have no duty to get those people back to where they've come from. So what reassurance can you give to local residents that they're safe? Thank you.
Joe, did you want to come in on
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, and I'm conscious of sort of going back over my previous comment, but there's no evidence that when people are released from custody currently that there are any instances, example of those areas being subject to any increases of crime or antisocial behaviour. We don't see those locations as hotspots of crime. At the same time, you know, I absolutely recognise the concerns that it raises, but there is no evidence to support that. And like I say, you know, we make that balanced judgment as to whether we are going to transport somebody, or we might take them. We might take them. We're good problem solvers, and we wouldn't, you know, we don't want people hanging around the reception area of any of the facilities. So you know, we'll try our level best, but we always have to balance that against, you know, what are our legal requirements, and what we do with, as I say, which are very expensive and finite resources. And you know, if I just give you the scenario, it wouldn't be right and proper to say we were transporting somebody home from a custody suite who wasn't vulnerable, and at the same time, while doing that, the police officer wasn't able to respond to an emergency call. And you know, it's that balance that we face.
Thank you, Joel. Can I just ask members to ensure that the questions that they ask are not questions that's already been covered through the presentation or by other members? I'll bring in Councillor Pete Malloy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With regards to location, I've had a look through the question and answer sheets, and there's no reference that I could see of other locations being looked at to build this new custody suite that would be more suitable for transport links. So I was just like to ask, where have the police looked more centrally, as in Durham itself, any areas around there that would be easier for people who have been in custody to return home, because you've got the rail links, you've got better public transport links like buses and taxis, etc., rather than coming straight to Spennymoor. Cheers.
Thanks, Pete. Actually, I'll answer this one because it's part of the scrutiny in my office in terms of alternates. To cut a long story short, in terms of trying to find a site that fits a number of criteria, including being on public transport and trunk roads, and also in terms of the location being relatively central to where people are detained. So we've got the two big areas of Durham City and the Darlington, and all points in between going north and south. This, with the research that was done, this site is the most appropriate place for that in terms of a single centralised custody facility. Gary, I don't know whether you wanted to add a little bit of additional detail around the work around the location that was done.
Yes, thank you, Steve. I think the only other points I would add is when you look at a custody facility, it has to be broadly flat. You're not allowed to have any stairs within it in terms of the custody environment itself. You can't go upstairs, you can't go downstairs. That starts to limit the choices. These do take up a certain amount of space, and I wasn't aware at the time there was any land available within the city centre that would clearly be part as well of any transport plan around congestion. And we have worked with the county council to try and identify this land. One of the alternatives we did look at, which we've made plain to people who've asked, is that we did look at an alternative refurbishment of Spennymoor Police Station. but we felt that that wasn't big enough to cater what we were looking for. We couldn't make it Home Office compliant in the same way that we can't make our existing custody sites compliant. So you are fairly limited in terms of land availability for these types of assets.
Thank you. Councillor Rachel Richards.
Thank you very much. Whilst my concern does echo, my question rather does echo what Madam Mayor has also said, I don't feel that you answered her question fully about traffic and access, particularly affecting residents of York Hill Estate. Would the transport be up York Hill Road from Durham Road, or would you be dropping down from the A167? Because if you say there's all hours of the night, I am actually a resident of York Hill Estate and it's quite a busy road as it is. I'm just concerned that that has the impact on residents hasn't been fully considered there.
Gary?
Sorry, Durham Road, is that the road that comes off the A167 headed towards?
Durham Road is at the bottom of York Hill Road by the cemetery there.
Yeah, my understanding is that the access points into the site will be mainly down the A167. They'll come off at the roundabout where the learning curve building is, and they'll come off there, and then they'll turn. As you come off that roundabout, they'll be turning left, and then immediate left again next to the Black & Decker site. That's where the site entrance is. What's important to understand as well is that whilst we do arrest people on a 24/7 basis, it tends to be early evening that tends to be busiest. But my understanding, and the chief will keep me right, we tend not to blue light prisoners to the custody facility. We tend, when you see a blue light, it tends to be responding to an immediate incident there and then, whereas it's different when we actually transport the detainees to a custody facility.
If I can just come in there, Gary, this was one of the questions that I put through to yourselves via the AP route. And the concern was that a shortcut could happen through Spennymoor to the York Hill, through the York Hill road that passes alongside it towards the custody suite. But I was advised by yourselves that would be a route that you would only use in very extreme emergencies. So you have said that the majority of the routes would be via the A167.
Yes, in terms of the current sites that we see, the two busiest locations for custody are currently Darlington and Durham. That's where the majority of detainees get taken. Therefore, if you think, well, if that's where they're being arrested broadly in those areas, then they will be travelling up and down the A167 to the site. That's what makes it central.
I've now had a note from Councillor Martin Harmer to say that he's now withdrawing his question as it's already been answered. So that concludes the questions from ourselves. As I've mentioned, if any other members has questions, please submit these to the town clerk and we'll try and get some answers for you. And can I take this opportunity to thank you for a very interesting presentation, and thank you for joining us this evening. You are quite welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but if you'd like to retire from it, that's entirely up to yourselves.
I think we'll take you up on your kind offer, Liz, and happy to revisit the council meeting at some point in the future, definitely.
Thank you, and I'll wish you a Merry Christmas and all the best for 2021.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
We'll now move back onto the normal part of the agenda, which is the public questions. Just prior to the meeting starting tonight, the town clerk advised me that the gentleman who had submitted his public question wasn't participating this evening, so the town clerk will provide a response in writing to him. Thank you. Planning matters.
None for this evening.
And to submit and, if approved, confirm as a correct record the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Town Council for Tuesday, 24th of November. Can I have someone to move those, please?
Madam Mayor, can I move these minutes as a true and correct record? Thank you.
Can I
And
second them, please?
thank you.
Thank you.
And moving on to committee minutes. To receive and approve as a correct record the minutes of the meetings of standing committees of the council, policies and resources of the 1st of December.
Madam
Chair-
Mayor, can I approve these minutes of the Policy and Resources Committee of the 1st of December as a true and correct record?
Chair, can I second that, please?
And the Constitution Working Group of the 3rd of March 2020.
Chair, you've missed out the Facilities and Recreation Committee.
Oh, I do apologise there, Councillor Thompson. Facilities and Recreation Committee of the 8th of December 2020.
Mayor, fellow councillors and members of the public, I wish to move the minutes of the Facility and Recreation meeting held on Tuesday, the 8th of December, and they be approved as a true and accurate record of the meeting.
I second.
Thank you.
Chair, sorry to interrupt, Chair, put RTS in to speak on these minutes for DFNR.
Yes, would you like to speak? But I will say that that has now been moved and seconded, Councillor Malloy. We have moved on now to the next item on the agenda.
I appreciate that, Chair, and I did type it in before it was moved and accepted.
Just check with the town clerk with regard to this.
Okay.
Can you put me on mute? Can I just ask if Councillor Malloy's question came in before those were moved and seconded?
Not on mute. You're on mute.
We can't hear you, Madam Mayor. You're mute.
Madam Mayor, you need to go. You're on mute. We missed the last point you're trying to make.
There you go. There you go.
Right, we have had a mover and seconder for the Facilities and Recreation Committee. I do need to move on that committee, Councillor Malloy.
Point of order, Madam Mayor. If the councillor has something to raise on those minutes, should that councillor not be allowed to speak?
I'll
Just because
bring
they've
it.
been moved and seconded doesn't mean that everybody's in agreement with them.
The question should have been asked prior to this being seconded. I will bring the town clerk in with regard to this. I'll bring Pete Malloy in to raise his question. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Ranyard. Or is it regards under the heading vermin control update? On the first paragraph, second line, it says that under Councillor McAloon's motion that it was for a second opinion. I was on the understanding it was actually to sort out the problem, not to receive a second opinion. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson asked Councillor McAloon to clarify, and that's actually what he said, and then the vote was taken. So we've listened to the video.
Right, thank you, Councillor Malloy. Can I move now on to the Constitution Working Group minutes? Now, these are dated the 3rd of March 2020. I would just like to point out to members that I did ask the question with regard to these minutes being dated the 3rd of March, why they hadn't appeared on the first item of the agenda of the first meeting after lockdown, which was in August. And we have had 2 other Constitution Working Group meetings since that time. But I will now go to ask members to move these minutes and have a seconder support it.
Madam Mayor, can I formally move the minutes of the Constitution Working Group on the 3rd of March 2020?
You're on mute, Councillor Foster. Can you repeat that, please?
He's moved them. So we need someone else to second them. Councillor Wood or Councillor Malone.
I believe you can. Yeah, can I formally move the minutes of the Constitution Working Group the 3rd of March 2020?
And do we have a seconder for that motion?
I'll second those because I think I was there standing in for someone.
Yes, you were.
Thank you. Health and Safety Working Party of the 17th of November.
Madam Mayor, in the absence of the chair, can I formally move the minutes of the Health and Safety Working Party of the 17th of November 2020?
And do we have a seconder?
Chair, you were the only other person there who could
Yes.
second.
I can approve them. ICT Working Party of the 25th of November.
Chair, Madam Mayor, in the absence of the chair, can I formally move the ITC Working Party minutes of the 25th of November?
And do we have a seconder?
Madam Mayor, I'll second them.
Thank you. Audit Committee dated the 30th of November.
Mayor, fellow councillors and members of the public, I wish to move the minutes of the Audit Committee held on Monday, the 30th of November, and they be approved as a true and accurate record of the meeting.
Thank you. Special Committee dated the 9th of December.
I'd like to move the minute. Oops.
Chair, I didn't hear a second for the Audit Committee.
Seconder for the Audit Committee. I was present at that meeting. I can second, Councillor Thompson. Special Committee, 9th of December. We've got Councillor Elizabeth Wood has moved them. Do we have a seconder, please?
Second those.
The sound is distorted on my computer. Do I have a seconder, please?
I'll second those.
Thank you. Members have before them the Mayor's communications, item 9. If I could also say that this afternoon, at the invitation to the Town Council from Lothian House, myself, Consort and Santa attended at Lothian House. We did have pre-prepared speech that we held up for residents from outside of the premises, and the Lothian House received the gift from the Town Council of the selection boxes. Thank you. So that is just to add to those papers. I now have Inspector Samut as leaving the meeting. Thank you. And thank you for your participation, Inspector.
No, thank you, Chair. I just want to say, as described before, if there's any questions that need to be brought to my attention around the custody or anything else you want to raise, I'm off from today, but I'll be back in the new year. So please do send them through to me via Catherine if you wish, and I'll try and answer them for you. All right, and I'll try and make this a regular thing if I can, to come to the meetings to give you another opportunity to speak to me other than the AAP meetings, which I know not everybody gets to. So just to let you know on that score. Okay.
Thank you, Inspector, and thank you for the work that you've done this year. No. And Merry Christmas and all the best.
Merry Christmas to you all as well. Stay safe, and hope you have a great Christmas, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Our next item on the agenda is performance management. And members have the reports before them. I would just like to raise an item myself. We have had the minutes approved tonight of the ICT working group. On the performance management, there was also an item on there which is costings for a specialist website, and that is to be referred back to the F&R committee as and when costings are available. So I look forward to receiving that report in due course. Item 11, traffic order consultations. We have 2 traffic order consultations. One relates to Spennymoor Division, Spennymoor Middleton Division, and the second one refers to the Tudor Division. And we also have the appropriate legal motions and the indication from the maps of where these traffic orders are going to be put in. If I can draw attention to the fact that most of the maps are dated January and March of this year. Thank you. I haven't got anyone that would like to. Sorry, I have got Councillor Ian Machin would like to speak.
Can I just ask, how come we've seen as many changes proposed all at one time and all over Spennymoor and Tudor? I can't recall ever seen anything like this before. What's behind this?
Chair, may I come in?
You can, Councillor Thompson.
You're on mute, Councillor Thompson.
For Councillor Machin, these are pulled together over a period of time, and they have to appear in the local press to be approved. If anyone complains about any of it, it has to go to the Highways Committee. But it's usually quite a slow process, and I think they try and push as many as they can through in one go.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Can we move now on to item 12, which is Ferry Hill Railway Station? And can I draw attention to the correspondence from Ferry Hill Town Council? In 2025, the region will commemorate the bicentenary of the railways. That will be an important celebration for the county, and with our associated links with the birthplace of the railways. So I think it's opportune that this item is on tonight's agenda. Does anybody wish to speak with regard to this? I have Councillor Neil Foster.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I say wholeheartedly I agree with this proposal. Can I say in terms of the history of the development of the Stillington and Leamside line, it has been a long-standing and ongoing procedure. I worked regularly with Phil Wilson, who was the former MP for that area, to put this proposal forward. Indeed, when the One North document was launched in Manchester with George Osborne as the then Chancellor Exchequer, I was one of the people who voiced vociferously the need to have the Stillington-Leamside line done. It was regularly raised at Northern Powerhouse meetings and at Real North meetings when I was present. Both myself and Bill Dixon, the leader for Darlington, voiced the need to make sure that this line is kept maintained and kept open, both from an employment point of view and also because it relieves some of the pressure on the line itself. It is important to remember when we're looking at this line that it's part of a service. Yes, it would be nice to have a station in Furry Hill, but also linking that to the potential station in Durham, which is linked to the park and ride system up there, and also the line into Newcastle. It is important that that's used not just for freight, but also to relieve some of the public transport issues up there. There is a little bit of a concern on the wider line on that the Metro would like to take advantage of one of the main bridges, which the Leamside line is on, and that could potentially, if it's not dualled, lead to the loss of this line. So it is something that I think it's worth maintaining. My only note of caution is it took 10 years to get Hordern Station done, and I had colour in my hair when I started on that job. So it is a long-term procedure. It is a lot of hard work, but I think it's one that's worth pursuing because I think it has benefits not just for Furry Hill, but for the whole of South West Durham.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. I have got Councillor Pete Malloy would like to speak.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Councillor Foster's just said, especially in regard to the Northern Powerhouse scheme and it would be, I see this as vitally important to get passengers on it as well. And if Councillor Foster is moving that Spennymoor Town Council supports Ferry Hill Town Council, I'll second it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a message to say Councillor Martin Harmer will be leaving the meeting now, and I'll bring Councillor Dean Ranyard in.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I fully support this correspondence we've had from Ferry Hill Town Council. I think opening a station at Ferry Hill would have great benefits to a lot of the residents across South West Durham, and including those here in Spennymoor. It would save people having to drive to Durham or to Darlington to connect mainline rail services. And also I do fully support the ongoing campaign to reinstate the Leamside line and to open the Stillington branch to passenger services as well. So I'm fully supportive of that. In addition to the motion that I believe is being put forward, that we support this, could I also add that we send a letter to our own Member of Parliament advising her of our support for this and asking her also to support the proposals that have been put forward by Ferry Hill Town Council and the Member of Parliament for Sedgefield. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, can I speak? I can't get through on my RTS.
You can, Councillor Madison. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm a little bit older than most of you. I can remember getting on a train here in the early 60s to Newcastle and then to Whitley Bay. This station closed in 1967, 3 years into Harold Wilson's Labour government. The Beecham report brought it out to close it, but it should have been overturned then because there was an awful lot of jobs were lost because this station had one of the biggest British postage depots in the country. Anybody used to get a letter and go there. It was absolutely massive. for the Royal Mail, and a lot of people lost their jobs in there. When I look at one of the problems I see, I will support this 100%, but one of the problems I see is I used to love to go to Durham, get the train to Newcastle, but when you were paying £5, £7 for a trip to Durham, to Newcastle, sorry, and then you had to pay £12 to park your car. That's what stops everybody. And we have had, the one before this was where DCC were putting yellow lines everywhere. If this station opened, they need a car park where people can park at a decent price, because DCC will come out and they'll double yellow line everywhere near this station. I support this. I support Ferry Hill 100%. Going back on the Leamside line, about 10 years ago, I was on a conference from this council, and the Leamside line was discussed. I used to live 2 miles away from the Leamside line, just at Park Hill, and we used to play on this line. It was a double line and a single line, but it was a road to nowhere. The scrapman pinched 2 miles of the railway line, and I think the rest was taken up and stored up on the Weardale line. But what the prices is now, for a mile of railway line, it costs something like £7 million. Okay, these railway lines were taken up, but all the railways now are electric. When this was taken up in about 1990, there was no electric. Electric was just coming into force. The Leamside line, there was nowhere to go. It went to Penshire. It was mainly freight. What I would say was this is, for people, Shincliffe Station was on this line and it shut in 1947. So it was 25 years before the Beeching report. One of the problems I see is when you say you're getting the train and catching up to the metros, if you go to Low Fell, you can't get a metro to Newcastle. It's impossible. You have to get a bus and then a metro. You know, I would really like to see it all come ahead. It's going to cost hundreds of millions for this, but if Ferry Hill Town Council want our support, I'm 100%, we should give our support to this and take more cars off the road. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Maddison. If I can move on now to item 13, double taxation, and bring the town clerk in for her report.
Thank you. To provide members with an update as to the progression of a proposed motion to Durham County Council re double taxation and the local council tax reduction scheme. Members will remember that Councillor Ranyard put forward a motion which was then amended by Councillor Thompson and was supported. A Durham County Councillor also put forward a motion similar to Councillor Ranyard's motion at the Durham County Council meeting in October 2020. The motion was not supported by DCC, and it was indicated that any motion should come to DCC via the County Durham Association of Local Councils, CDALC, as opposed to coming from individual town and parish councils. I attended a virtual meeting with CDALC in November 2020, where 3 motions were discussed, the one from Spennymoor, one from Shildon and one from Great Aycliffe. As not all town and parish councils were in attendance at the meeting, CDALC decided they would write to all town and parish councils to explain the situation and to request if town and parish councils wish CDALC to put forward a motion on their behalf. Attached to Appendix 2 is the outline of the discussions, and as you can see, this is CDALC now consulting all town and parish councils. However, the motion suggested by CDALC does not contain any request re the local council tax reduction scheme. However, this was what the majority of attendees on the CDALC call voted for. So if members look at Appendix 2, page 1, you will see the motion that CDALC have now put round to all town and parish councils to see if the majority of town and parish councils want to actually put forward something to Durham County Council in relation to double taxation. And that's the only motion on the table.
I'll bring in Councillor Kevin Thompson.
Chair, I'll support the motion. I won't make an amendment like I did last time because there's very little point. CDALC is mainly made up of Labour members, and they think that they have their thoughts around the local council tax reduction scheme. Now, but what I would like to say, and I've said it a number of times, and I'll keep on saying it, if you refer to just above action required, the paragraph, the page isn't numbered, so I cannot actually tell you which one, but it's above action required. It says the local council tax reduction scheme payments that are made, which is a significant sum, and far outweighs the double taxation payments that we have previously made. Since 2013-14, we have passed circa £13.4 million of local council tax reduction scheme grants payment to the local town and parish council. This annual double taxation grant payments that were removed was circa 0.25 million. I would like to point out of the £13.4 million that Durham County Council received from the government, and as unfairly passed it on to us, we have received £568,000. However, because we took the 1,100 reduction in our council tax base, our town has lost £1,920,000 because of local council tax reduction. And bear in mind that the unparished areas, because the unparished don't have that sort of contribution, they, like us, also pay an amount into the precept for the general fund. So I'm going to support this because I think the county has taken enough money off Spennymoor. New homes bonus around about £5 million. As I'll repeat myself, quite a substantial amount through the reduction in our council tax base. So yes, I'm quite happy to support this, Chair.
Thank you. And I now have Councillor Dean Ranyard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I think also I have to support this. I would go with what has been proposed, that that CDALC puts that motion in on behalf of the Town Council. It's disappointing, I think, in some respects, that the County Council wouldn't respond individually to town and parish councils. But either way, as long as the issue gets looked at, I think that's the main thing. Because it isn't fair, the current system, and some sort of rebate should be paid to those areas which currently have residents paying to the County Council and also to a town and parish council. Recently, I heard on the news the Member of Parliament for North West Durham being very critical of Durham County Council over the festive lights display at concert. Now, it's interesting to note that Durham County Council are paying for festive lights in concert, but they're not paying for any festive lights in Spennymoor. That's all paid for by the Town Council. So our residents here are paying for the lights in concert, and they're also paying an additional premium for our own lights. So it's not a fair system. It needs to be looked at. And if this is all that's on the table, then I support that. This is the way forward to get Durham County Council to look at this issue further. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other...
Madam Mayor, can I come in? Madam Mayor?
Councillor Madison, can you use your RTS, or is this a problem?
It's a problem. It's a problem.
Okay.
I would just like to say, going back on this double taxation, I remember it being presented. Mick Watterson was chosen to go and present this when he was the head of Shildon. He was the guy that went and spoke to Durham County Council, because about 14 years ago, we used to get £26,000, and then it dropped down to something like 12. All of the other local areas, the same ones, Aycliffe and Shildon, they lost a lot of money on this. Luckily, we have our crematorium to fall back on, so it doesn't hit us as much as it hits them. But when it was addressed 6-7 years ago, it was thrown out, and I do believe it'll be thrown out again, along with the the rest of it, I think Durham County Council had the meeting last week. I listened to it, and we ain't going to get anywhere with it. But you do have to put forward that you want it. I'll support that, but it's just we ain't going to get anything. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I have no other requests to speak unless Councillor Kevin Thompson, do you wish to speak again? Can you take yourself off mute, Councillor Thompson?
Are we going to move to accept the CDALC's motion? Because if so, I'm quite happy to move it.
Yes, we are, Councillor Thompson. And I'd like a seconder for that.
I'll second that.
Thank you. And I would also like to ask now, do we have any objections with regard to this motion? Because if we don't, can we all accept for the town clerk to take this forward? And I have nobody expressing any objection. So I'll ask the town clerk to take this forward. Thank you. And we now have item 14, external audit. And if I can bring in the finance manager to talk about this.
Thank you, Chair. So the report, the purpose of the report is just to update members on the external auditor's report and certificate in respect of the 1920 annual governance and accountability return. So the return was submitted to external auditors Mazars at the end of August following Council's approval. And as members know, the completion of the audit of the return was delayed this year due to the coronavirus. The external audit process was completed in November and received the external audit completion letter and the external audit certificate and report on the 23rd of November, both which form part of the report. I'm pleased to report that we've received an unqualified audit opinion, which represents a clean bill of health. So in practice, this confirms that the Council's accounting statements have been prepared in accordance with statutory requirements and proper practices and are free from material misstatement or error, and that the Council's governance, internal control and internal audit arrangements are considered to be effective. So regulations also require the Council to publish the audited the annual governance and accountability return together with the external audit report and certificate. This normally has to happen by the 30th of September. However, with the statutory deadline was extended to the 30th of November this year, again because of the coronavirus. So regulations also require the Council to publish a notice of completion of the audit, which sets out the rights of the electors being able to inspect the audited return. So I've already made the arrangements to publish the audited return and notice, and these were published on the Council's website and notice boards on the 24th of November, the day after we received it. So therefore, it's recommended that members receive the external auditor's audit completion letter, external audit report and certificate in respect of the 2019-20 annual governance and accountability return. Note that the arrangements made to publish the public notice of the completion of the audit and the audited annual governance and accountability return are on the Council's website and notice boards. And also to note the unqualified external audit opinion highlighting the annual governance and accountability return is in accordance with proper practices and no other matters have come to the Mazars' attention given cause for any concern and that relevant legislative and regulatory requirements have not been met. So total clean health.
Thank you, Tracy. And if I can just thank you, yourself and the town clerk for the work that you've done with regard to this audit and the fact that you have got an unqualified opinion. I think it's fantastic. So very well done. Thank you. Are members minded to accept the recommendations?
Yes.
And we have general agreement on that. Thank you.
Yes.
And can we move on now to item 15, precept? And can I bring Tracy, our finance manager, in on this as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the 2021 precept, sorry, 21-22 precept. I'm not going to go through the report in detail, but I'll pick out the main points. So the purpose of the report is to present to members the 2021-22 precept for approval, thereby permitting the submission of the precept request form to Durham County Council for setting of the Town Council proportion of the Town Council tax. The 2021 budget was considered and approved by Policy and Resources on the 1st of September, when the Council's net budget requirement was agreed. This report requests the Council to formally set the precept and therefore the Town Council's proportion of the council tax for the next financial year. Once the precept has been set, an appropriate member is required to sign the precept request form. So the 2021 net budget requirement, as represented by the precept, is £1,360,181, which is an increase of £1,582 on the current year's precept. The council tax base for 2021-22 will be 6,190.8 Band D equivalent properties, which is an increase of 7.2 on the 2021 base. So the precept for 2021-22 represents a 0% increase on the council tax. So therefore, it's recommended that members approve the precept for 21-22 of £1,360,181, and that the Mayor is authorised to sign the precept forms for submission to Durham County Council, which has to be submitted by the 22nd of January 2021.
Thank you, Tracy, and also, again, thank you for the work that yourself and all other officers have done in preparing the information. We have had extensive discussion on this at a previous meeting, and I'd just like to put it to members if we are in general agreement with the recommendations.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'll sign the appropriate forms later. If I can now move on to item 16, which is a request for the Town Council to support an additional defibrillator, and ask for the Town Clerk to present her report on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is to advise members of a request from Councillor Geldard in his Durham County Council role for the Council to take on the revenue costs if he uses his DCC neighbourhood budget to purchase and install an additional defibrillator in the area of the Greenways estate. The initial request is that it should be placed on the external boundary wall of Jubilee Park, however there is no main supply. Councillor Geldard is therefore making inquiries re other options in the area. So basically he's asking that in principle that no matter where this defib goes, that the Town Council commits to pay for the pads, which are replaced every 18 months. They're £70 plus VAT each, and there'll be one set for adults and one set for paediatric pads. The battery life is 5 years, and the batteries currently cost £275 plus VAT, and the monies would be taken from the health and safety budget. So members are asked to consider the request from Councillor Geldard, and that if members wish to accept the request, they can authorise the Town Clerk to complete the application to the AAP.
I have Councillor Kevin Thompson would like to speak.
Yeah, I myself have put defibrillators in across the town, and I've got no objection to this defibrillator being placed. But just one little bit of concern: there are other people like the church, St. Paul's, who were paying for their own after we've actually used our neighbourhood funding to put them in. So it may be that there may be some further requests coming back for the Town Council to also maintain those. But I am in favour of defibrillators, and I'm quite happy to go forward with it, but just express that little bit concern.
Councillor Neil Foster.
I'm more than happy to second the proposal as outlined. For suitable location can be found, and I do agree that we do need to keep an eye on the number of ones that we're agreeing to.
Councillor Clive Madison.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's great to see so many defibrillators all around the town. I remember I put the first one in here at the bar, which was going back at my second year of office about 16 years ago. And I had to write a 3-page spread because some of the older members, nobody knew what they were. And we finally got that in, and they're everywhere now. So I will support this. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Pete Malloy to speak.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I support the installation of a defibrillator through the around the Greenway Estate area. I have been contacted previously by a couple of residents from the Greenways Estate area on this very subject, and explained over obviously the electrical points for it to be wired up to, and the only place more central in the Greenways that I could think of at the time was obviously the Ash Tree pub, and we know that that's not council, and anything could happen to that would have been a private business. And that up by Jubilee Park, that may well be the best to cover that area, but it's on the peripheries of the area. Also, I have concern over the maintaining of the pads and that, like Councillor Thompson has brought up as well. But on the whole, I'm for this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other requests to speak, but I would just like to ask if members could consider that this be a one-off item, and that we treat any future applicants' requests being presented to the council for approval. Thank you. IT hardware for members, item 17.
Thank you, Chair. Members will remember that at the previous meeting in October, there was a lengthy discussion around the proposal for IT hardware for members, and it was decided to move the proposal to the ICT Working Party. None of the finance costs have changed, although we may need to be a bit flexible. But the ICT Working Group has now brought this back to Council, and they've asked that Council support members being allowed to request IT hardware on the basis that they sign the indemnity agreement and agree to abide by it, which is at Appendix 1. So it would be, if the Council agrees, it would be up to members to request a laptop, and they would have to sign this indemnity agreement in order to obtain it.
Thank you. I have Councillor Neil Foster to speak.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I thank the Town Clerk for the conciseness of the report. Having had the discussion at the ITC Working Party, I'm more than happy to agree with the recommendation as outlined in the report.
Do we have general approval as regard, oh sorry, I've got Councillor Ian or Judith Machin would like to speak.
Yeah, I was at the IT meeting as well, and I guess reluctantly support what's proposed. I would move that we choose option 2 on the grounds that the only software, the only app to be installed on the hardware is Zoom. So I don't see the need to pay the extra cost for a PC.
I'm not, I wasn't present at the IT meeting, so I don't know what the general discussion was on that. And I believe the chair of this meeting isn't present tonight. So is there any other members had any discussion on this one that can offer information?
Through you, Chair, I was at the meeting and the general consensus was that it should be option 2, because the first option is 3 times plus more expensive. Plus, members don't need access to the server, they don't need access to the shared drive, etc. So they could go with the cheaper option of option 2, and it should meet all their needs.
Right, thank you. Councillor Kevin Thompson.
Chair, I was at the meeting, and although I'll second Councillor Foster, I would just like to point out for any members of the public that may be watching that this didn't appear to be a general issue to all members for a computer. It's only for some members to come and request one who haven't got one, who have been having some difficulties attending our meetings. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dean Ranyard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think it's right that the council facilitates the ability for all members to partake in the democratic process of the council. Obviously now, due to the coronavirus pandemic, we've come to a situation where we have to have virtual meetings. Whilst the vast majority of members are taking part in these meetings, there are a small number who haven't been able to for whatever reason. And I think we as a council need to be able to facilitate it for those members to partake in these meetings by offering them the computer hardware if they so require it. Obviously, the costs of this could be quite considerable if all members chose to take this option up. But I'm fairly sure that amongst the current group of members, there will not be a big uptake on this, but there should at least be the availability for those members who, for whatever reason, may not have the facilities at the moment to partake in the current meeting arrangements. So I'm quite happy to support what's been put forward. And I would agree with Councillor Machin that the cheaper option would be the more sensible one. The Chromebook laptops, it says, can be used to support Zoom. And I think that's really the only reason a member would need this equipment for. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've got Councillor Pete Malloy would like to speak.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, I'd just like to say I'm against this. The reason being is this has only come about because of the current situation we're in, that we're having virtual meetings, and most of us anyway have got our own laptops, smartphones, tablets, and we can attend virtual meetings using our own gear. You know, it's a bit of give and take. You know, we've chosen to put ourselves forward to become councillors, and that's voluntary, you know, and we do get an allowance of £1,000 a year minus tax for some. And, you know, when this current situation dies down, and it will do probably in the new year, there'll be no need for virtual meetings and we'll go back to face. I just think it's a waste of taxpayers' money, so I can't support this, and I move that we don't accept it, any of the recommendations. Thank you.
Have Councillor Ian Machin would like to speak.
Has the amendment been seconded?
It's not an amendment as such, so I've put a report forward. So it's now for members to vote on whether they support the proposal, which is to provide the hardware, or not. So I suggest we take a vote.
And I'll ask the officers to run through the... Sorry, can you speak through the chair, Councillor Machin, please?
Oh, sorry, I thought you'd asked me to talk.
So, what were you saying, Councillor Machin?
What I'd like to add is that if we move forward with this, I'd like to add to the motion, if that's what it is, and that the town clerk brings back a subsequent report to let the councillors know how many people have availed themselves of the laptop facility, because we went down a similar route after much debate about phones, and I don't believe anyone's taken up the phone option, which, as Councillor Malloy pointed out, could in fact be used to join a Zoom meeting. So I'd like to request that the town clerk brings a report back to council to identify how many councillors have availed themselves of the cost of a PC.
I'm happy to do that. The first thing we need to do, though, is to vote as to whether members support the recommendation to provide IT, or they do not support the recommendation to provide IT. If they do support it, then obviously I'll bring a report back, but if they don't support it, then the matter's gone.
And so I'll now bring in the officers to run through the members present to take a vote. So we are voting on the motion to accept the recommendation 2.
Right, so are members in favour of providing IT, or are they against, or do they wish to abstain?
All members are on mute, so can you please
No.
Sorry, I'll bring the town clerk in.
The mayor's just about to mute herself so that we don't get any interference when an officer takes the vote.
Okay, Councillor Abley, please.
Against.
Councillor Foster.
For.
Councillor Hammers left. Councillor Mr. Machin.
Against.
Councillor Mrs. Machin.
Against.
Councillor Mr. Madison.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Madison.
I'll abstain on this.
Councillor McAloon. Councillor McAloon, you're on mute. Councillor McAloon, can you take yourself off mute, please?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Malloy.
Against.
Councillor Anyard.
For.
Councillor Richies.
Apologies, 4.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Mrs. Thompson.
For.
Councillor Mr. Thompson.
For.
And Councillor Wood, please.
For.
Thank you. That's 8 for, 4 against, 1 abstention.
Please.
So the recommendations in the report have been supported.
On that, the town clerk has just informed me that we've now reached the 2-hour stage for the a dispensation request to members to allow this meeting to go forward to consider the items that are now on the agenda from items 18 to 21. Can I ask members if they can formally approve a dispensation to allow the meeting to proceed? It is a statutory requirement.
Approve.
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 Do we have general consensus on that?
Approve.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. And could I ask for a 5-minute comfort break for members in order that we can just take a break, have a coffee or something. Just to say that when we do return, we will be under exclusion of the press and public. So for those members of the public that have attended the meeting tonight. Thank you for your attendance, and I do wish you I was muted there, so you may not have heard what I had to say. I'll just take it. So I'll repeat again exactly what I said previously. If we have had any members of the public attending here tonight, we're now moving to the exclusion of press and public. So I'd just like to thank you for your attendance and to wish you a happy Christmas and very best wishes for 2021. And members, I am formally requesting